Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Wharton, for having me. I've already learned a lot. I've learned all of the commuter routes that Delta runs in the Northeast already, so I'm already getting a lot out of the conference, so thank you so much. So, as Adi mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Paddle HR, and what we try and do is help large companies keep their best employees by matching them to new roles within the company. So this is a really big problem because the number one reason why people leave their jobs is because they just don't know what to do next in their career. 42% of people that leave cite a lack of future growth opportunities as the reason that they're doing it. And that's costing $40,000 per departure in Fortune 500 companies. That's based on a 6 to 9 month salary replacement cost. And internal mobility has a lot of really great benefits. So it's a lot cheaper to hire someone from inside than from outside. You can save $7,000 in just cash costs alone, not to mention that you often get them for a lower salary. Internal hires get up to speed quicker, they reach productivity quicker, and they end up performing better. That's actually out of a study that was done here at the Wharton School. Perhaps we have someone on the table who's worked on that. And internal opportunities just don't have the same visibility that external ones do. So your competitors are spending a ton of money to put their opportunities in front of your employees, while your internal opportunities sort of sit quietly on an internal job board and just don't get seen at the right time. And so opportunities for your employees to take those get missed. So why are we taking this on? It's because currently incumbents aren't really handling this. HR information systems don't have great solutions to handle internal recruitment, which is leaving most companies to use ad hoc and low-tech methods. So 88% of companies don't have a formal program for lateral movements. They may have something for going up, but they don't have anything for lateral. So this is a big opportunity to help people move around the company. So this is where Paddle comes in. We've taken a big data approach. We have 330 million people's career histories, which we've been analyzing to build out career models and predict where people are going to go next. That's sort of the science of what we do. The art of what we do is based on a 5-year research program that started at McKinsey and has been published in the Harvard Business Review and Oxford University Press. It's about what makes switching careers successful. So I call these sort of the art and the science of what we're doing at Paddle. And so it's allowed us to build better career predictions using machine learning. And so this is what we do. So we are an AI-powered career pathing platform powered by these career histories. We match employees to career paths within organizations to lower attrition. So I'm going to give you just an example of some of the outputs we're able to develop. This is a career analytics platform that we have that shows how people move through an organization. So on the left-hand side here, you can see customer service representatives. So this is one position within, it's a telecom setting within an organization. And as you move to the right, you can see the different roles they took on. And internally, this was perceived to be a dead-end job. They didn't really understand where people left. And that's part of the problem with internal mobility is it's often based on intuition or anecdotes. That's how we build our model about how people move inside organizations. But the data often tells a really different story. And so here you can see there are pathways to sales, there's pathway to retail, there's pathways to leadership within call centers and training roles. Some of those are more obvious, but some of them were total news to our client. So this is how we help HR leaders. We take this information and we use it to power individual recommendations for employees as well. So what you're looking at here is essentially a replacement for an internal job board, but instead of seeing roles ranked by location or by title, we're able to actually say, here is the fit that you would have. And we're basing that off of their career history and the skill sets that they have. And we can do the same for recruiters. So essentially, we can do the inverse. We can show, for a given position, what candidates internally would make a great fit at this point in their career. And we allow employers to sort of put in some business logic. Don't take anyone who's only been here for 6 months. Don't poach anyone on a mission-critical project, things like that, so we ensure that it's not disruptive. But it allows recruiters to tap into a really great set of talent. So we're working with two huge companies. They're over 25,000 employees. One is Rogers Communications, they're a telecom, and one is Canadian Tire, they're a retailer. I wanted to share just a little bit of what we've been learning from these clients. The first thing we've learned is that the ROI is super clear to leaders in the organization. They get that career paths, really strong career pathing, equals better retention and engagement. So we've seen that from the CHRO level down throughout HR. So that's been really reassuring. 2, internal HR data is really messy and hard to get to. And so that's something that we've been learning a lot. What's interesting is that Paddle actually has a unique skill set around dealing with this. Because we're using a lot of resume data, that's kind of the messiest HR data out there. Everyone calls their job something different. So we've gotten really good at classifying jobs, using natural language processing to analyze these. So internal HR data is actually not much of a problem for us, but it's been really interesting because HR leaders really think that their data is really, really messy, and they're nervous about sharing it with organizations like Paddle. And the last one is that the problems are not evenly spread. So internal mobility isn't universally spread across the organization equally. So some organizations are really good about moving people around, and then another department or another division actually has no ability to move people laterally or move people around. So that's one thing we've noticed as well, is that it's really not evenly spread. And so just a quick note on the team. So as I mentioned, I'm Pat. My background is actually in using data in the world of politics, not for Cambridge Analytica. That's terrible, in far more ethical ways. And Sid Bargov is my co-founder. He's our CTO. He's a Waterloo engineer. I don't know if that means anything to people down south of the border, but the University of Waterloo is an excellent engineering school. And he's formerly of Microsoft and Accenture. And so just to recap, we're an AI-powered career pathing solution for enterprises. Our first client is live, and our second one is about to go live this month. And our pipeline, we have a ton of interest from Fortune 1000 companies. Our pipeline represents another $2 million in annual recurring revenue. So I'm going to leave it there and pass it over to the judges and answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate the walkthrough, the setup of the problem that you're trying to solve, and the approach that you've taken. One question I'll maybe start with is, could you share a little bit more about how the sort of 330 million career histories that you trained your AI on, and how you started to develop that process that you're applying now to other organizations?
Yeah, so we partnered with an organization to gather externally posted career profiles. So think LinkedIn data, AngelList data, GitHub, way up is popular with new grads. Facebook even has some public work history. So we're looking wherever people are posting their public career histories online. And we're taking that data, but then, as I mentioned, it's really messy. So the next step is really to clean it up. And so we built a lot of job classification algorithms. So essentially, we use computers to read the jobs, the titles, the contextual information around the jobs, where it was, what they did before and after, what their school was. And we try and predict essentially what is that job that they're trying to describe. So you call it a senior sales associate, someone else calls it a sales specialist, senior. And so we do a lot of work to try and classify that. And so then once it's classified, we run a prediction algorithm that is essentially based on two things: career history. So I did job A, job B, and then job C. Can you predict what job D is? And then also given a bucket of skills, because that's often a large part of the data set too. So given a list of skills, can you predict what job would come after that? So we use both of those to kind of figure out historically what's happened, and then what are some of those non-traditional moves that come out of the skills. And then we kind of combine those at the end and give them to the user.
Great.
So when you are actually doing this, are you giving suggestions to hiring managers about people whose career paths look like the career paths you've seen before? Are you matching some sort of internal job description to a skill set? Mm-hmm. Are you ranking between people? I'm just trying to get a sense of what data is actual data is actually being presented to the hiring manager.
Right, so it's a great question. So what we have actually found is there's a lot more interest in showing employees jobs than showing hiring manager candidates. We're able to do both, but we found that there's just an interest from HR leaders in organizations we're talking to give employees essentially more insight into what to do. Because employees either have, well, I could do my boss's job, but they're not going to retire anytime soon. Or I could go to the job board, but there's thousands there. And there's sort of this gap in the middle of saying, what are a dozen really great viable options? So that's what we're trying to fill. Is that middle gap. And so what we're doing is we're first trying to predict what the job they would do next, and then we look at the open jobs within the company and we say, okay, you've got that, you've got that, you've got that. And we use that we do that using natural language processing on job descriptions as you described.
So a quick follow-up question to the data question that Reb was mentioning before. So the data you're collecting from outside tends to be workers with externally focused careers. Is there a plan? It'd be great to be able to incorporate kind of the workers you don't see moving across companies. Is there a plan as you work with clients to be able to reincorporate that into your engine?
Yeah, so if I can play that back to you, you're saying that there's potentially a group of people that are just not captured on those public profiles?
They
Is
have
that-
different paths that are only on internal databases that you may not, they're harder to get at.
Absolutely. So, okay, well, there's actually probably two groups. So there's one that's in internal databases, and I'll talk about that in a second. But just briefly, too, I will say that the online public postings, they have a bias. They have a white-collar bias. And so you actually miss a ton of employees that are working in retail, for instance. That's one that's come up a lot in our work because we have a lot of retail-focused clients. And so that's a big problem, and we're trying to overcome that using internal data, but also we're looking at, can we get into like the Indeed's resume database or places where there might be a more holistic group of resumes as opposed to just the LinkedIns of the world. So that's one thing. Internal data sets, I think that is actually, like that's sort of the secret sauce of what Paddle's trying to do, is to take this external data set, which is out there, we're not the only ones in the world that have it, and marry it up with internal data within the company to one, validate that, but they both have different advantages. The external data is kind of like a wide-angle lens. You can see what they did before they came to the organization, even what they did after they leave. The internal data is like a microscope. You can see every little internal move that they made, which sometimes gets lost in the external data. And it rounds it out. So we can cover probably 80% of a client's employees using external data. That last 20% has to come from internal. So we typically stage it as a phase. Let's use external data. Let's show some value to the customer. Let's get them some results. And then let's go through a data security process and get that data in and analyze that and essentially improve the results.
Thanks.
I was really struck by your one of your earlier remarks that by using this tool that the salaries for people moving into jobs would be lower than if the company had made an external hire, which made me wonder whether a process like this institutionalizes some adverse effects like the gender pay gap and job ghettos where there's a gender bias for existing career paths. So could you talk a little bit about how you're addressing that?
Yeah, I think this is probably a faux pas. You're not supposed to pitch another company doing your own pitch, but there's a great company that we worked with out of San Francisco called Compass, but it's comp as a service. And they're really specifically trying to target this and use data to try and actually predict the equitability of your paying structure. And so it's not a primary focus of Paddles, mostly because, we lost our slides here, that's okay. It's not a primary focus because we're focused on that job match piece. What we're more interested in is how have career histories, like if you're using the past to predict future career histories, is a potential to build in the bias of certain parts of the population just not getting promoted as quickly as other parts. And so one thing that we've been thinking about, right now we've taken the approach of let's train it blind of all those things, but two is can we actually take action when a customer is interested in it to actually promote certain opportunities to groups that have previously not had the opportunity to grow as quickly in their careers as they had in the past. So I think that the pay is a really interesting point. It's not a particular focus of ours. That's more of a benefit of internal mobility broadly, but I think it's a really fair point. But we're really more interested in saying, how can we help everybody be empowered to take the next step in their career equally?
Thank you.
No worries.
Fantastic. I think that brings us to time, pretty much. We probably won't get another question. So thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Jeremy Hindle. I'm the co-founder of CTO at Head Start. My responsibilities include the product, engineering, and data science teams. Head Start is a technology company born from the concept that people are more than a piece of paper. You're more than your grades. You're more than what's on your resume. And we believe that each individual is a sum of all of the experiences they've had, and the achievements which they gained in those experiences should always be measured as such. I'd like to show you a short video which explains that. It's quite intense. I saw that for the first time, I was like, you really want me to show that at this kind of an event? And they were like, yep, this is how we feel. So that's how that went. So what does that really mean? So I want to use grades as an example because it's kind of applicable. What does it mean when we want to use contextual data? Because people talk about contextual recruitment a lot, but our approach is very, very different. So if we look at, let's say, look around you, look at students, look at your colleagues. Let's say you have 2 people who have applied to Wharton, all right? One who's had every opportunity available to them, and another who's faced significant difficulties in their life. And let's say now both of those 2 people have identical GPA scores, or an equivalent grade. Do you feel that those 2 people should be considered as equal? Well, at Head Start, we definitely don't think so. We believe grades and, for a matter of fact, any other bit of information that you see on a resume and any achievement requires contextual information about how it was achieved and where it was achieved to actually measure the value of that achievement effectively. So let's talk about grades again. We split context around grades into 2 categories, achievement context and requirement context. Achievement context considers the environment in which you achieved that particular grade. So to look at the quality of the school that you've gone to, your teacher's performance, the size of your class, but also things like the personality of that individual. The reason why personality is important is what happens if you're an introvert and you're in a very large class size? You're even less likely to be able to put your hand up and say that there's a problem, and therefore you're more likely to fall behind, and therefore your grades might suffer. That needs to be considered when you consider somebody's grade score. Requirement context considers the relevance of a qualification for the job in question. So that basically means how relevant is this grade as an actual predictor of what we're trying to measure here. And the way that you do that is you look at things like what modules were attended by a particular university student or what syllabus was completed. You have to look at what was actually taught to them. And the thing is like the real goal of this is to understand what did the candidate actually have to go through to actually achieve that. And that gives you a much better understanding of what they're actually good at. And that's all great. And I can speak about this as much as you like. But fundamentally, does it really work? And the fact is, it does incredibly well. So we work with a range of enterprise clients already. I'd like to tell you about our first recruitment cycle with Accenture earlier this year. We ran a process where all of the candidates who applied for graduate schemes at Accenture first went through Head Start's platform, where we assigned match scores to them for all the individual roles at that graduate scheme. Then, all of the ones with above a 65% match score were handed across into Accenture's legacy recruitment platform and also into their legacy recruitment process, which includes assessment centers and interviews and all of that kind of thing. Then at the very end of the process, Accenture gave us all of the information on how far those candidates reached so that we could compare them to our initial predictions. And the result was pretty amazing. In fact, even better than we expected, given this was our first recruitment cycle and our first data set. So we processed about 23,000 applications between November and January. And of those applicants, we had a 91% candidate completion rate. And that doesn't sound like anything that important, like when you compare it to sort of like sales metrics. But what that means in the recruitment industry, that is a ridiculous number. The best competitors in our market are happy with a 60% completion rate. And most large enterprises use legacy software solutions, which have completion rates somewhere between 30 and 40%. And the reason why that's bad is that is bad for diversity, because the first people to drop off are people from low socioeconomic backgrounds and people from ethnic minorities. We absolutely wrecked that, and we expected to. That was the thing which we knew was going to happen. This was the thing which we thought wasn't going to be quite as amazing as this. We knew it would be good, but not this good. What we found when we looked at the data which came back from Accenture was that if Accenture recruiters had reviewed candidates top-down based on our match scores, they would have only had to review 1,900 of the candidates manually out of the 23,000 applicants. That means they could have spent more time on candidates who were the best fit, and they could have offered a better experience to candidates who weren't, letting them know that they weren't a good fit so they could look for places where they were better, or even better, be recommended jobs by us when they were rejected. Not only that, we did this whilst removing bias from the process. We looked at their legacy system and looked how people moved through those stages, and we found that there was, for mid to high tier, so those are people between a 70% and an 80% Head Start match score, for Accenture specifically, we found that Asian ethnic minorities were 15% less likely to be past screening process, and black ethnic minorities were 18 and even 19% less likely to be progressed. It's needless to say, none of that happens in Head Start process. We're a data-driven business. We don't include that information in the match scores that we calculate. And when we do things like weighting to improve social mobility and help companies develop their diversity initiatives, it's transparent. Like unsupervised machine learning is a transparent process. It's much easier to look at some code and say, this is the calculation that's being done, to understand the unconscious bias in your recruiters and try to train it out. So things are going really, really well for us. And we're about to open our third office. Our head office is in London. And we have a satellite office in San Francisco, which we opened during Y Combinator last summer. And we're about to open our regional office in New York in June. As far as like our new projects, we've got a really exciting one with Accenture, obviously, based off the back of that case study. We're breaking out into the US and APAC. And we also have a 250 location research project across the whole of North America with a really well-known retailer. I guarantee every single one of you have seen them in the last few days. And I'm really excited about that because it's going to give us some new data, which I believe will allow us to predict for retailers better than anyone else. As a side note, my co-founder and I won Forbes 30 Under 30 for social entrepreneurship this year, which was just an amazing achievement. We were really happy, and it was really great for our team to see that as well. So one of my favorite models that we're working on, one of these is something I call an opportunity coefficient. The goal of the opportunity coefficient is to identify the individual opportunity for an individual at every point in their life. The reason why this is useful is it will allow us to weight the value of somebody at any point in time, so at that point in time in their life. And we want to offer that to third-party point solutions as well, so they can also value things based on their level of opportunity at that point in time. Distance to learn, I'm happy to do this in questions if you'd like, is it will allow companies for the first time ever to hire based on people's future ability to learn a skill. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. It seems very exciting, and thanks for stopping. We can ask more later.
Yeah, sorry.
I guess, so this sounds like a machine learning solution where you take a bunch of data in, right, and you're predicting outcomes, and as a result, you might have different kinds of biases, but there are always biases in these things. So I was kind of curious about two things. One, what is the data source you're training this on and the outcomes you're training this on?
Yep.
And second, you said it's much more transparent. Part of the idea of the machine learning process is not actually that, I mean, the original code is transparent, but you have a propensity score that we don't know what that comes from. So how is it more transparent, and what's the data you're training in and out on?
Okay. So first off, I'll answer the first question first, and that's where the data for. So first off, we profile companies to identify microcultures and their high-performing traits within their existing teams. We do that across the whole board, and that's done with our own in-house psychometric tests. And we use that to map a culture and identify the exact groups that people will be working with. And that's part of that matching algorithm. Other data collection sources include public data. It includes a lot of the information which you just heard about in a previous talk, where we're collecting from job descriptions across the whole web so that we can identify what skills are associated with them. So if a candidate only says, oh, I worked at X and I did this job, we can actually fill up their profile with extra information about them so that it gets rid of social mobility issues where they haven't been taught how to represent themselves effectively. We can actually represent themselves better and teach them to do that. And as far as the machine learning thing, the reason why, the thing is, I think this is a really common misconception. Supervised machine learning is a bit of a black box, and it's not very transparent, and it will select for the same kind of candidates. But unsupervised machine learning, yes, you will get the biases which get put in by developers. But the point is if you're measuring your application really effectively and you have really top-level analytics, you can identify those biases, they come out, and we actually measure them, and therefore we can change them. It's much, much harder to look at a person and say, you're being unconsciously biased to a person, to train that out of a whole culture within a business. So I'd say, yes, there's always bias. There's bias in everything. You can't get rid of it. But what you can do is you can measure it and adjust, and that's what we can do.
I'm actually very interested in that distance to skills project, so I'll give you another minute if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
I'd love to chat with you about it.
Okay. I mean, can you tell us also a bit more?
Okay, cool. So basically what we do is we have a graph database. It's layered, soft skills and hard skills. And what we do is we map a weighting between every skill and achieving other skills. So based on one skill, how difficult it is for you to achieve another one. It's really easy to do with programming languages. That's the easiest stuff to do. Other things are a little bit more difficult. And what that means is when you take all of the skills which an individual has achieved from their past work, from skills which they've come and said that they've actually got, you can map this into there, and you can actually tell them, you can tell us, and we can see how difficult it is for them to achieve anything else. And that's really, really powerful. You can do really amazing things. Companies can hire based on what they want that candidate to be able to learn, which means they can concentrate on things like cultural fit. They can concentrate on whether that person really wants for the work for their business so that they stay and they retain that employee. And also, like on the other side, a longer goal of it would be we can inform candidates what they need to learn. We can be what our business was actually originally before we pivoted, which is we can be like a genuine career companion. We can help people learn what they need to know to be able to achieve their goals and dreams.
So just following up on that a little bit, so Accenture is a really interesting
Yeah.
partnership to begin with.
They've been great.
Including the fact that it's, it's absolutely global.
Yes.
So do you find that the algorithms work equally effectively across the globe? Or are there places where there have to be modifications, and then how do you introduce those to the hiring managers and get them to understand their own cultural differences?
Okay, so the way that our platform is structured is that we have algorithms which are concrete and they don't change, and we have lots of them. And then what actually changes is the weightings of how much those algorithms contribute to the final score. And those are the things which change based on market, based on job type, based on seniority, all of those kind of things, which means that our platform is reusable across industries, across countries, across cultures, all sorts of things. What we have done, we have most definitely focused mostly on the UK with Accenture, and now we're breaking out, as I mentioned. And yes, it's going to be very different, without a doubt. We have to collect more information from third-party sources in new spaces. So we, in the UK, for example, we can identify the level, we already have done the opportunity coefficient stuff for the UK, and we're doing it for the US. We're about 3/4 of the way through right now. The data's a lot more sparse and dirtier on America, but in the UK, it's really, really good. We can measure, based on where you live when you're 14 years old, your access to education, your access to healthcare, your access to facilities, all of those kind of things, and we incorporate that all into that overall fingerprint.
Super, thank you.
Something I'd be curious to hear more about are your impact numbers. So that was a really impressive slide of the different things you've been able to achieve so far. The two in particular, I'd love to hear you unpack how you calculated those. Are the time savings, where you said that I think they would have only had to review 1,900 applicants compared to 11,000.
Yeah.
And then how you calculated the reduction in bias against the ethnic minorities.
Okay, so first I'll start with the time saving.
Sure.
So basically, traditionally in recruitment, I have to be careful what I'm allowed to say. So traditionally in recruitment, what a lot of companies do is they have a hard break-off based on a minimum grade value or certain schools, things like that. And that was what that 65% pass across was. That was actually based off a statistical line where minimum grade values were associated with that. Okay. So the way that Accenture would previously deal with their extremely large volumes is they would essentially hard cut people out based on factors like that. Yep. So what we're essentially saying is it's a time saving based on if they actually reviewed every candidate fairly and from the top down. And the way we calculated that was that every single candidate who got to offer was in those top 1,900. Yeah. Which meant that if they started top down, they would have seen every single person they eventually offered a job for, basically. It also included a lot more diversity, which was incidental to that. Okay. As far as the actual bias reduction, that was more of an observational statistic on what actually happened in their system. We just know that we don't include that in our match score, and therefore we know that it's just not a game changer in ours. And we can also see in their recruitment statistics for every single role what the actual outcomes were in diversity, and they were way, way above the national averages.
So is that a change in ranking, like the scores that those applicants had, or is it a change in actual number of hires?
They had the same scores on our platform, and they didn't get progressed in the legacy platform. And it was because of, we believe it's because of an SJT bias, because they group BAME groups together rather than actually looking at ethnic minorities individually, and therefore they didn't have a significant bias. This is an assumption. And also we think there could have been a name bias as well.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So today I'm going to talk about not Picon as a whole, but as a specific innovation that we've had that has powered Picon forward on our journey. So Picon is an employee engagement platform, and we launched in early 2016, and since then our growth has been quite rapid. We're over 100 employees now and over 350 customers. And the customers come from a wide range of industries. So we have some large professional services firms like Capgemini and Randstad, but also manufacturing plants at BMW and luxury leisure brands like Harrods and the Dorchester Hotel. Now, benchmarking is really important to us because the reason these businesses have come to us is because they want an objective way of understanding engagement in the business and what is really driving engagement. They don't want a general purpose culture survey where everyone kind of piles in their own questions just to win the next argument at a management meeting. They truly come to Picon for this specific reason. Now, if we think about the evolution of benchmarking, If you think you start off with your own independent question set when you're running a survey, so you're using something like SurveyMonkey, right? You're kind of at the top here, right? Where you've only got your own data and you have no real concept of what is good or bad. You might have an idea if you're actually improving or not, but in general terms against the rest of your industry, for example, you don't really know. Then you get to the second layer where you might be able to compare scores against all sorts of other businesses. But where engagement surveys have kind of stopped for perhaps the last 10 years has been with industry benchmarking. And of course, this is a lot better because there are certain characteristics, or we believe there are certain characteristics of businesses that fit within industries. But given that benchmarking is such an important part of Picon, we got a lot of questions from our customers about benchmarking in general. So who else was in the benchmark? How big are they? What country are they from? And as you should do really with any kind of product input and requests from customers, you really want to understand the underlying need for this rather than just answer the kind of outright questions. And what we found was really that they wanted to know that the benchmark was relevant to them. If you're going to judge yourself against something and make a lot of strategic plans off of it, you really need to know that this is an accurate and relevant tool for you. So a little exercise here. Imagine you have 3 employees and you tried to guess from 0 to 10 what they would give in answer to a question to measure their engagement, right? You've got no other data about them, so it's basically impossible, right? You have no idea. The next step would be, okay, I know what industry they're in, so I have an idea that, well, interestingly, they're all going to be the same because they're all in the same industry, and I think they're all going to be 7.9. But now imagine if we gave you an extra bit of information, and we told you how recently they joined the company. So you've got one person here who joined last week, someone who's been here for 2 months, and someone who's been here for 8 years. And then you'd probably think, well, of course, like the new person is going to be a lot more engaged. There's this honeymoon effect that intuitively makes sense to people. Now, with this and with the huge amount of data that Picon has, our data scientists got very excited because there's these kind of 3 principles that they were explaining to me about why this was a really interesting problem. So you understand the question specifically, you have enough data to be able to answer it, and you know that the data is actually highly relevant for answering the question. So we actually managed to fully quantify this honeymoon effect. So we could see here that employees in low tenure, with low tenure, were much higher engaged than the people that had been here for a long time. Now, we could also do this with other things. We could do this with age. So there's like this millennial effect, which perhaps I'm a bit of an outlier because I work for Picon, but in general, people who are millennials are supposedly a little bit less engaged than older employees. So if you imagine back to this pyramid that we had at the start, now we're adding a 4th layer, which we've called true benchmark, which is where we've been able to take the general trends from these kind of attributes that we have from all employees answering surveys at Picon, or all of our customer base, and model them into a benchmark. And we've not just done this with tenure and age, but we've been able to do this with professions, with office locations, and with seniority inside the business. And this is what we've done. We've put this on every manager's dashboard who is using Picon. And now Picon customers do engagement in a way that's very decentralized. Every manager is empowered to use the dashboard in their own way as a self-service process. And so we've really made benchmarking a lot more transparent. Now, there's 2 important things that kind of lead us to what's the impact of this. So the first one is kind of around that honeymoon effect in particular. Now, if you imagine you're a company and you've got low engagement scores, you've probably got quite high attrition. So in 1 year, especially if you're doing this kind of old annual survey approach, in 1 year, you lose a lot of employees. And then next year, it's solved, problem solved. No more engagement problems here. Well, guess what? 6 months later, they all leave as well because you haven't actually fixed the problem. You've just hired a load of new employees who are just generally more engaged, as we've shown with these trends. The second part of this is that whether you have this technology or not, everybody thinks they have this technology in their head. Now, you've probably all heard every manager when they get their engagement score back and feedback from their team. They say, I've got loads of miserable designers, or I've got loads of millennials, or, everyone rationalizes away the scores that they get in their engagement surveys. Now, we know that if people are really going to improve engagement, and it's not going to be stuck on this level that you probably all hear the same stat for the last 5 years, that only 30% of people are engaged, et cetera, We're going to do this by empowering managers to actually do something about this and really take ownership of it. And the way they take ownership of it is that they actually believe that this is a fair way of measuring their effectiveness as a manager. And that's why this transparency is very important here, because we can say to managers, you may have thought this, but we can bust all of these myths. We can give you a really accurate way to measure your own success as a manager and truly improve the engagement of your team.
Such an important, interesting area of people analytics that I think's had a lot of attention for a long time. So it's really interesting to see something new, come forward. But two old problems that come to mind that I didn't hear you address, I'd love to understand. How do you deal with communicating to managers when their team size is really small?
Yes.
And there's the question of, I guess, anonymity and the protected nature of the feedback that people think, that they're sharing. And then the other question I really wondered was, taking ownership is fabulous, but you can't take ownership of somebody's age. And so what strategies really would you see managers and other leaders doing with the benefit of this additional transparency?
Yes, okay. The first question, sorry.
My first question had to do with small team sizes.
Yes.
And whether anonymity and protecting, that is important in using and gathering this data.
Absolutely, yes. So we have a minimum, what we call minimum segmentation size, which customers normally set to perhaps like 3 or 4 employees, whereas instead of getting kind of comments and scores kind of split out, instead we would only be able to show you that if you're above this team size. In general with Picon, obviously anonymity is super important, but we're really trying to get to a phase where kind of the team is also sort of feels part of solving this problem. So we really don't want, to have an anonymity level of something like 10 where, if you are in this small team, you can't really communicate with your team like this. There's actually a lot of features in Picon that are also quite innovative around this with comments, where if you're a manager of a team with, say, 5 people in and you get all these comments in, you can actually acknowledge these comments and send a response to the employee to say that you've read the comment, and actually you have sort of 4 choices, a bit like Facebook, but for kind of management. So like, thanks for sharing, we're already working on this and stuff. And we're just trying to kind of bring everybody together to know, if you're being listened to, you kind of also take it upon yourself to want to solve this thing yourself. The second point, sorry, was about...
Well, we can come back to it. Let me let the other judges have a chance, because we only have about 4.5 minutes left.
Something I'd like to hear more about is, you mentioned that one reason why this true benchmarking might be more effective is that managers may see it as more fair.
Yes.
Have you tested that? Have you looked at manager perceptions of this, or looked at how it actually impacts their attitudes toward the results and then their subsequent behaviors?
I think the best way that we can quantify that is that about a year ago, we broadened the scope of our NPS measurement for users from the kind of admins and HR directors down to line managers as well. So we started asking them the classic NPS question, right? And at the time, we had an NPS of like 55 for admins, and then we opened it up to managers, and it was 10. We were like, oh no, this is completely not what we wanted to be doing with Picon, where we really wanted to be empowering managers. So we've introduced tools like the acknowledgement feature and tools like this, and over the last kind of 9 months, we've seen NPS increase. And now for managers, the NPS is 64. So I think that's probably the best way that we can say, managers are enjoying the platform more and they're really buying into it. I can get back to your point about the correcting for age. I think what we're trying to do really is just to show managers that this is a fair representation of you and your ability as a manager, rather than, you cannot correct for age, right? But it's just to be kind of fair to them that, if you're being compared, so you've got a manager looking down and there's your 3 line managers, and you've got someone who's got a team of new grads or something like that. You don't want to be thinking, oh, well, how's this fair that my benchmark is the same as them, when, you have this different demographics of the team.
So one interesting thing sort of floating out there was a gender adjustment that you had set to 0 in this particular case, right? So I can imagine there'd be a bunch of areas gender is a good kind of hot button thing to think about, right? So we know, for example, teaching scores bias against women, right?
Yeah.
There's just a kind of clear, persistent bias. So first of all, I'm trying to figure out how you would find out the bias towards women versus men if women are getting, there'd be a systematic score adjustment. Are they supposed to have the same average?
Yeah,
Is that what you're trying to average out any potential downside? And then second of all, I think having that as a minus for somebody, right? Let's say we are, you're lucky enough to have women outperform men in that organization, contrary to most of these scores, but then all the women would now see a negative score that you're having points subtracted for being a woman, or alternately for being a man. How do you, first of all, are you averaging out the scores at the end? And second, how do you deal with this kind of
It's a really good question. And the first time I saw this iteration of the feature, I was like, oh my gosh, because I thought that exact thing. The reason why it's in there is essentially more of a myth-busting tool because we see hardly any difference. Like when you see these corrections, you can see there are massive differences between, for example, how tenure and age kind of affects things, and also profession. But it's just like the tiniest things with gender, but we wanted to put it there specifically for the kind of transparency and kind of myth-busting around it, where people had this perception that perhaps having like a team with...
Sorry, just to throw back, myth-busting in whatever company you looked at, but I can't imagine that there's no gender effect across any organization that you look at under circumstances, right? So you're saying something else about parity that isn't actually true in most organizations also, right? So wouldn't that ring false for people?
I think in general around how engaged the genders are, I don't think we've seen that there is a difference in how engaged male and females are. We've seen some differences in driver scores, for example. So we've seen that perhaps in what correlates to being important for engagement, we've seen, for example, that organizational fit has been more important for females than males, and some observations like that. But, yeah.
We only have a little bit of time left. I'll ask a quick question. So the attributes you're looking at make perfect sense, tenure, gender, and so on. Just out of curiosity, if you're looking to the future a little bit and thinking about getting into that individualized sort of understanding what that number means, do you, anything in the pipeline that you're thinking about that could be interesting to further condition these kinds of benchmarks on?
I think the biggest thing that we're being driven by our customers is to get more and more granular with location, because we're at a stage now where we're doing location by region, because you simply need just like such a massive data set, right, to be able to do it by perhaps city, right? You're going to need like 12 very large companies in each city to be able to do this. But that's like the biggest demand that we have, because what people really want is a benchmark to say, I want to know engineering departments in London, in financial services businesses. I want the benchmark like specifically for that. So I think in terms of where we're heading, that's probably the major focus.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Alrighty, good morning, everyone. Thanks for getting here despite the weather and probably a number of other things. My name is Melissa Marsh. As mentioned, I'm founder and executive director of Plastarc, with a background in political science and architecture, followed by architecture and strategic HR. I've spent my career trying to negotiate the relationship between people and space. And by and large, buildings don't understand people as well as we might think, and people don't understand buildings very well. In sustainable architecture, that means that we overrun the building and don't use it properly, and there continues to be an absence of social research and people analytics in the architectural education and industry. From the Millennium Bridge that wobbled because of the way people walk, to the buildings and workspaces that we currently occupy that are full of clues about how they might better work for people, but managed or organized by companies that don't know how to leverage that information to make the workplace better. And by and large, most of our physical office environments are pretty crappy. Furthermore, there's a lot of this space that we're talking about, and we spend most of our lives in this space. Even combining work and home life, most people don't spend more than 20 minutes a day out of doors, even when the weather's good. So these spaces aren't performing for people, Meanwhile, knowledge organizations proportionally spend 10 times as much of their resources on people as real estate. We're increasingly leveraging technology to help people work better, but I would argue that we're not yet where we need to be in leveraging real estate to optimize human performance. So that's where Plastarc comes in. 5 years ago, after 10 years in architecture and consulting fields, I founded an organization which is social science and people analytics for architecture and built environments. Each person on the team focuses both has education both in the physical world, building sciences, architecture, interior design, as well as the social sciences, whether that be political science, people analytics, maybe even geography. And we're focused on making the world a better place, one workplace at a time. When I founded Plastarc 6 years ago, I kept in mind a very simple toolkit. It's a mixed methods approach to understanding what is the current work environment and how could it be better suited for people, including occupancy, survey, understanding of individual perceptions of the environment, as well as interactions with staff within that work environment. Almost all organizations want to make better places for their people, but they don't really know how to, or they can't get from the physical environments that they have now to a people-based business case for transformation and change. So, as I mentioned, Plastarc has been operating for 5 years with consistent organic growth. We've been kind of a double bootstrapped organization, spending our available resources on additional research, advocacy, and outreach. And I'm going to talk to you about 3 moments in the kind of history and future of our organization today. And of course, have to give a shout out to our clients over the years, absolutely exceptional organizations who themselves have been on the cutting edge of making places that make work better for people. So what do? We sit at the intersection of HR, the human resources and talent expertise, like many people in this room, IT, the technology backbone of the organization, and the real estate, facility management, interior design. All of these things combined make that employee experience that we're often talking about, but commonly real estate and place is left out of that equation. I also describe what we do as combining big data and little data so that we both have the resources of big data, but the actionable insights of small data. We also live in a world right now which has an unprecedented opportunity to correlate sentiment and place through people's mobile devices and the way they're interacting with their environment. If you're familiar with real estate, it's always location, location, location. That's the one thing that doesn't change in architecture in the built environment, but all the other layers are more and more changeful than ever before. In addition to moving around furniture like you might have been able to do historically, you can now use your mobile application to change that environment, which creates trace data about people's choices in space. Our first proof of concept of this was 4 years ago with a global peacekeeping organization in an iconic building on the east side of Manhattan, where we brought together information about occupancy of space as well as people's preferences of what aspects of the work environment they liked or didn't like. We were able to bring evidence that people occupied spaces that they enjoyed and that had features that worked for them, and the spaces that didn't work went unoccupied, and that space was being wasted. We were able to engage the organization in reducing the square footage of their environment while adding additional services, diversity of space types, and bringing more people into less space, which actually resulted in more satisfaction, and we could bring those data points together. Nowadays, 4 years later from this initial proof of concept, every day our clients have more data and information than they did the day before from people's mobile devices, self-quantification, and buildings are getting smarter too. So that takes us back to the founding methodology of our organization. And this simple process, which gives us the ability to make that people-based business case for workplace transformation. And we're just in the last 2 years, we've been able to license this to real estate organizations, as well as we're building an accessible model of it, which allows organizations to self-assess. And we're currently seeking funding for what we think is our next step. We've done this on an ad hoc basis. As I mentioned, our clients have more and more information than ever before. And so they're coming to us and saying, can you integrate this survey? Can you integrate this bit of data or information that we have? So just as at this event, we see lots of new companies and great analytics in the HR world, we have the same in the real estate industry. So every year, there's more data and information, more companies that are tracking people in space or tracking elevators operation in buildings. And so we're currently on a growth path to ingest more and more of these individual data sets in order to be able to advise on the total future work environment for our clients. And that, we believe, will bring us to not just better work environments that are that platform for engagement, but actually environments that can themselves grow and change over time.
Thank you, Melissa. It's so interesting, at least for me, it's not an intersection that somebody's really ever presented to me before, so I found it so interesting, and I apologize, I guess, for personalizing my question a little bit, but as somebody who learned firsthand that 80% of adults will experience a temporary disability that will make it difficult for them to use their work environment in the way that they have expected to use it, I'm really I was curious, actually, by the omission of, in your presentation, of supporting companies in their ad hoc demands on changing space. And I wondered if that wouldn't have been more top of mind and perhaps a source of demand. So I wonder if you could just touch a little bit about that, even though I acknowledge it's adjacent to what you've already shared with us.
So maybe two things. One is a lot of true accessibility is regulated or mandated in architectural environments. And so some of that is covered in that regard. A lot of our work does touch on topics about what sensory or physical capabilities might change over time, either quickly, like a temporary condition, or as we age. So our hearing changes, our sight changes, and better work environments need to be better dialed into those things. And then I would say, finally, everything that we're doing is working to put the changefulness of the work environment into the hands of the individual occupant. So whether that is lighting or temperature or all of the things that make us feel uncomfortable, or being able to bring aspects of the environment to you if you're physically unable to do something. Really, everything that we're working on is helping companies make a business case for their spaces being more changeful. So I think we're covering it, though maybe not as explicitly as you mentioned.
Melissa, can you tell us a little bit more? You had a slide on employee satisfaction, but how do you know when you've done a good job? Like, what kinds of measures? How would you think? How do you think about that?
So we pull sentiment information both directly from survey information and direct request. We also pull it from adjacent or public information, whether that be an internal to an organization like a Slack channel, or external to organization like a Twitter or Instagram impressions of a working experience. One of the things that's happening in the world of work is that all of our buildings are opening up because people are going in with their devices and saying, I love my desk, I hate my desk, I love my conference room, et cetera. And then I would say at the end of the day, we have proven that people vote with their feet, and when people have choice and opportunity, they'll be in the places that they love, and they will avoid the places that they can't. We sometimes say the difference between co-working environments and office environments is you have to pay people to come to office environments. And so really, I think the opportunity opportunity is across office environments or any spaces, the future is it's going to be judged that the space is better if more people want to be there and more people have flexibility than ever before. So part of our solution is to show pre-build or while projects are in design or development, what is going to bring people to it, what is going to make it happy, helpful, positive sensory experience.
Related to that, from a sort of product and service perspective, so you talked a little bit about licensing, you talked a bit about making a self-assessment tool.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how does an organization get started in this space, given that a lot of organizations are probably not yet doing some of this kind of analysis?
Yeah, so I think the real problem here is the separation of languages between each of our disciplines. So the HR talent world has one set of languages, the IT and digital infrastructure has one set of languages, and architecture, interior, real estate, facilities management have another one. And so part of what we offer is kind of a bilingual or trilingual approach, where we bring into one data collection both dashboard and input mechanism, a place for each of those constituents within a client organization to bring their data into that place, which then allows us to look at those things that wouldn't usually be looked at side by side in one location and begin to compare and contrast. So probably with many consulting or engagement projects, our starting point is data collection from across the organization and education across those constituents about why it matters. And as you know, when you bring mixed modes of data in terms of what they're tracking, there's lots of cleanup work to do. But I've also recently heard that when people enter their own data, they think it's more accurate. So maybe that's a help out.
And just to follow up, so how then do you go from that place where you're right now needing to start with a lot of new data collection and then cleanup to a self-assessment model?
So the self-assessment is really the phase one of it is that the client puts the information there on their own.
Okay.
One of the challenges of our consulting is that we spend a lot of our time getting data and much less of our time having the insights on top of that data. So the first step of the self-assessment is that the client is sharing their data in all one location as a first step.
Okay, great.
And can use more of their own internal resources to do the build of the information dashboard.
Thank you.
Do you find certain kinds of employers are systematically more receptive to this kind of thinking?
I think a lot of it started with Google. Had a chance back right after I finished graduate school of working with them pre-IPO, and their founders would literally walk around in the environment and test with sensors. We actually have tape measures at our booth with the idea that everyone can measure their own environment. This device has 2 light meters on it, one for the phone, one for the front face, and one for the camera. So I think that where the culture of the organization is quantitative and kind of people performance quantitative in nature, they have a greater interest in that. Also, our lead organizations are financial sector who want to be as quantitative about space and people as they are about numbers. Biopharma, life sciences, where they have the interest in, they have the kind of natural proclivity to see space and people and whatnot together. Technology companies where there's a lot of people coming into the space over time, and so the space is even more impactful in how it's expressing your culture. It almost becomes a user guide to your company in physical constitution. And then the federal government pre the current administration actually has a lot of policies around telework, sustainability, and no net new footprint that push it to be more embracing these topics.
Okay, thank you. I think we're at time.
Thanks. Really appreciate it.
All right, really excited to be here. I know I stand between you and lunch. I also took a red eye through Cincinnati this morning to get here, so I'm going to talk loud, I'm going to talk quickly, and we're going to cover a lot. We're going to talk about predictive hiring. I work at Koru. I'm one of the co-founders. It is a 4-year-old predictive hiring company. We take the new signals of workplace success, combine it with machine learning to predict the performance of your job applicants before you meet them. We call this the grit over grades revolution, and you're all been conscripted into the revolution. How many people remember Blockbuster? Show of hands. All right, remember this? We drive to the store, you wander the aisles, everything's in a blue or white box, they all look the same, you grab something, you go home and you realize you don't like it, right? How quickly did that change to the world of Netflix and similar things where you get access to much more media, but it's curated in a way that's based on a fit for you, and it doesn't decide for you, but it makes you a better decider. Well, the same thing is happening in the world of recruiting. Just like wandering the aisles in Blockbuster, we wander the aisles at career fairs. We submit resumes there or online, hundreds of resumes for every job. Recruiters spend an average of 6 seconds looking for the magic formula of where you went to school, what your grades were, did you work at Google, Facebook, Amazon, and do you like long walks on the beach? I pick you out of the pile, sign you up for an interview. It's an unstructured interview. It's called mini-me hiring, right? I meet you. 4 minutes in, I've made a decision whether or not I like you. I spend the next 56 minutes doing confirmation bias to validate my own biases, right? And we're surprised that we're not good at this. At least a third of hires are bad hires. It's very expensive. Estimates are 100 to 300% of someone's salary is the cost of a bad hire. One of the worst places in sales, up to $400,000 for one bad hire. So hiring is broken. We spend about $65 billion a year in the US alone in recruiting and hiring, and we're still not doing it right. So what is at the root of this? Obviously, there's challenges with data and bias and manual processes, but there's a big epiphany that a lot of people are missing, and it comes out of Laszlo Bock. He was here a couple years ago at this conference speaking about it. We're relying on the wrong signals, right? A lot of this data, the structured data that we already have, is not very predictive. What are the things that are predictive? These human traits and skills, the things that actually show up whether someone can have an impact. We know that in our heart of hearts. We've always known that. That's why we put them on our competency maps, why we put them on our job descriptions, why we put them on the values on the wall. And then we go back and we look for whether you have a 3.7 GPA. So what do we do at Koru? We're helping mid-market and enterprise companies transition from this traditional hiring, which is about old signals, bias, and manual processes, to predictive hiring. Let's look at research-based signals. Let's integrate recommendation engines, predictive modeling, and importantly, let's level the playing field. That's our core mission, which is that people can access opportunity based on what they can do, not based on where they went to school or based on the bias of the interviewer sitting across the table. So how do we do that? The first thing we do is we have to measure the things that matter. So we've developed and really refined a 20-minute online instrument to measure these 7. We call them impact skills because soft skills sells them short. It's based on a lot of research that was done here at Wharton. I spent 7 years at the Gates Foundation before co-founding Koru and was actively involved in a lot of this work. And so we've really said there's good research out there. Let's put it in the hands of hiring managers. So we validated the ability to measure these things. And so we're bringing in signal-rich data that has previously been a blind spot. We mix that with structured biodata on where you might have gone to school, leadership information, prior work experience. And we put that in a modeling tool. We built an internal modeling tool to very quickly run that through 2 regression-based models and 3 machine learning-based models to identify the strongest predictors of who are your top performers, who are your long retainers, whatever the business outcome is. What that allows us to do is come up with a fit model. What are the attributes, the combination of impact skills, academic signals, workplace background, that allows us to say, if you have most of those things, you're a high fit, and you're going to be 3 times as likely to be a high performer as someone who's low fit. We do that in just very practically, we deploy it as part of the hiring process. We deploy it in the interviewing cycle, usually at the top of the funnel, so we can screen in candidates you otherwise would have missed. We say, good news, you're on to the next step through our partners ATS. And we say, come, tell us more about yourself. Show us that you're more than a resume. We know that you want to get out of that resume black hole. That's the #1 complaint of candidates. And we'll actually share back a high-level report of your strengths. That's the #2 complaint from candidates. So they have a positive experience with your brand. That data gets compared to your hiring profile. Every candidate comes back stack ranked. So now instead of just guessing based on last name, or Adam Aardvark gets more interviews than Zachary Zachariah, Right now, we're actually focusing where candidates are most likely to be a fit in our organization. We can move them right in, quickly get them in an interview before somebody else gets them hired. When we actually speak to them, we can understand their strengths and their weaknesses, and even have structured interview questions to target against those weaknesses. And it's not just about making better individual decisions. The data across the funnel allows us to make smarter decisions about where we're spending our resources. This is a quick chart on campuses based on both volume and the percent of high fit, so we can target our scarce resources. So why do we do all this? It's about business outcomes. It's about impact. We are business people in my organization who bring data science and assessment science to bear on these types of outcomes. These are real examples, right? A sales team with 23% more high performers, a logistics company who reduced their turnover from 50% to 13%, an investment bank that increased their offer rate to underrepresented minorities by 4 times, a technology company that cut the number of final round interviews for their hiring managers in half because being more targeted. That's the kind of impact that we're seeing. We have a great team. I mentioned some of my experience at the Gates Foundation. My co-founded a company, took it public. We have great experience in HR and ed tech. And then finally, just on traction, these are some of the customers. We've been in market about 18 to 24 months with this product. We have a few dozen customers. SaaS model, they pay a subscription, $50,000 to $100,000 a year typically. We've been working in financial services, professional services, technology companies, and are really now at the point where we have these great companies, logos, great case examples, great team, great product, and we're at this inflection point where we're really now ready to scale and take the grid over grades revolution further to market. So now you're all conscripted into that. Thank you.
Thank you. So, not to put you on the spot, but how are you different from Head Start or some of the other companies we've seen that are also doing this, right? So this has been the sort of theme of the analytics. I judged the contest last year. Obviously the holy grail is let's use data and machine learning to do hiring. What's the differentiator here?
Yeah, for a startup, aren't we innovative, shoot for the moon? It's probably not going to be the answer that you're looking for, which is I think that we're standing on the shoulders of work that's actually been done in the last 20 years and not trying to overshoot where the market is. So we leverage a lot of existing IO psychology work, defensibility, things that have been proven out both legally and in the research base. And we try and bring a much more modern experience both to candidates and to recruiters, and then weave in some of that biodata and machine learning. So to really we sort of think of this more as a Toyota Prius in terms of a hybrid that takes the best of the old with the new, than saying we're going to be able to predict things that people have struggled to predict for decades with a brand new, only machine learning, only publicly available data approach.
Along those lines, to the extent that you can, could you share a little bit more about what type of assessment you use in that 20-minute profile, how you validated it, and in particular, also how you've measured performance when you say that you've built your model around predicting performance?
Sure. So 20-minute instrument, there's 3 techniques. We've leveraged existing sub-competencies that come out of the research, but then there's 3 different techniques being used there. One is forced choice. So we currently have 2. We're going to triads. Secondly is biodata around skills. Think about your last job. Here's a set of skills. Which are the 5 that you use most? Okay. And then third is situational judgment. And then what we do is we validate that against sample of current employees. And so look at those top performers versus underperformers. And can also do that over time. So once a year, we update those models because we have another cohort through.
And so would that then be primarily based on performance rankings, or if it's a role like sales, then sales revenue?
Yeah, so obviously we love the ones where there's quantified data,
Yeah.
like sales teams, customer satisfaction in a call center. Turnover obviously is pretty binary. We tend to try and get at least 2 measures whenever we can. In the case of performance management, we have a qualitative measure. When a law firm, we're like, well, let's get billable hours as well as the softer one to try and triangulate. If somebody shows up in both models, we feel a lot better about it than only in one.
Great.
Does your model, your fit model, help in any way to overcome the documented undershooting, I don't know if that's exactly the right word, that women generally confront with respect to applying for jobs, where they are vastly more hesitant. I apologize for not recalling the statistics, but they're much less likely to put themselves out there for a job that they are at least equally capable of as a man, where the man, if they've got 20% of the skills, they think, I'm a shoo-in for that.
Yeah.
So how does your work potentially help us overcome that?
Yeah, so two ways. One is the measures. We've independently validated each of these impact skills as not carrying bias based on gender, race, ethnicity, et cetera. So by bringing this data in, you're able to screen more equally. So it cuts out some of the diversity in the process. Now the question is, what if they never applied in the first place? So what we will often do is, as we start to develop multiple models for different job families around an organization, is we'll run candidates against all the job models. So we'll say, you applied for this job over in the customer service team, but we actually think you'd be good as an account exec. Yeah, you don't have sales experience, but we found out sales experience isn't important. But you have the teamwork and the grit and the rigor, so we'd actually like you to come and apply here because you're a 90% fit here, and quite frankly, you're only 20% fit in the call center.
And all of your client companies have that open-mindedness with respect to the predictions from your fit model?
I wouldn't say all of them necessarily. I mean, many of them start with one job family,
Right.
so it's an evolution to have the multiple ones. But a lot of them get this idea of fit. We do a lot of early career where they acknowledge that people don't always necessarily know what's a good fit, and so not wanting to lose a good person, they're trying to hire for potential.
Right.
And to the extent you can use data to both help the company and the person, that's a win-win.
Yeah, thank you.
I kind of had a similar question to the one Gail just finished with. Maybe I'll ask a slightly different way, which is, so you began the presentation with some of the biases that emerge with traditional, which I completely agree with. So when employers are confronted with these new signals, it's a lot to process. And so is there an education process, or how well do you feel they perform relative to the old model where it's maybe biased but a smaller number of features?
Yeah. I think our challenge is much more around change management than data science, for sure. A couple things are true there. One, we always will survey the hiring managers. What do you think? Gather that, share that back to the organization, ask for their input before we just start saying, hey, here's this new predictive model. Two, I mentioned those 5 different modeling techniques. We will oftentimes pick a model that is not quite as strong, but is easier to understand, that unpacks a black box, because a black box is not helpful. And then the third is, as we're rolling out those models, we really have to do a lot of education, because even when people see it in the data, they still have their biases. So I'll mention a law firm. We identified that mid-level leadership was actually the best trait to have, experience to have to be a successful corporate lawyer, which is this thankless, secretary, treasurer, vice president, where you're doing twice the work and get none of the credit. But law firms love to recruit editors of the law review, president of the mock trial association. So they looked at the data and they said, of course, that makes sense. That's the nature of the job. Yes, we're going to go for mid-level leadership this recruiting cycle. And then they're like, why are all the editors of the law review ranked so low? Like, don't we want to hire them anyway? And so we really found that it's a big change management effort, and to bring them along and use this as another piece of information as opposed to hit them over the head with the black box.
One just very brief question. One of the most interesting slides to me was the one about the college profiles for targeting recruitment based on which recruitment sites are producing candidates with the highest fit. Are you doing that for criteria other than college location? So saying, gender, age, prior experience, tenure, or is that primarily focused on recruitment location?
We probably, we've built some analytics into our platform, but a lot of it comes through our customer success team, partly because of the change management, partly because these analytics are more bespoke. Yeah. And people sort of contract with this as that extension. So sometimes we cross-tab multiple things. So it might be school, but I'm looking for high fit gender diversity. I'm looking for high fit underrepresented minority diversity. So what are the 3 best campuses there?
Okay.
So we are trying to do some of that. And then obviously, about half our customers are using us in campus recruiting and half are not in the campus. So there's different criteria that they want to look at, maybe by source, et cetera.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.